meetings that will need to be attended to. Council would be nice to be participating in that, if there is any counselor that has a burning desire, slight desire, little bit of that might be cool desire to participate in this. I would love for you to reach out to the city administrator, ask your questions, and volunteer. This, of course, is a commitment that has a finite thing. It's not like one of those committees that I'm asking you to participate in that could go on for 4 years. This will be done and over with by June, when the census is complete. So please consider this and reach out to the city administrator or myself, if you'd like, about this opportunity. And if there's anybody with a burning desire right now, if you could raise your hand. That'd be fine too. Okay, I won't put you on the spot any more than I already have. Whoop, did I see something?
No, I was just gonna mention that, next city council meeting, I'm hoping to have the regional representative for the census here to give you a presentation on it.
And that will be good, because she'll reiterate, or I'm not really. Michelle, okay, will reiterate the importance of the census to our community and the importance of counting every one of us, because that means, translates into dollars, both state dollars and federal dollars. And we do not want to leave any dollars on the table. We want all the dollars we can get, so I look forward to that presentation. Let's move to 10, business of the city administrator. Let's see here. Can we move and go ahead and do 8.3 right now, the audit? And we actually have something that we need to pass in here, or is it just a discussion? I think it's just discussion for the audit. So the audits.
Just wanted to make the council aware of the price that we're paying for our own services.
Right.
It's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah, it's $20,000, $20,700, it's already in the budget. It's not, we're not going to be asking you to approve it because it's already approved, but I want you to know that an expenditure is beginning. They've already had their first communications back and forth about what information they will need to get it started. And we will have, I hope to have a timeline for the council so that they'll kind of know what the process is going to be when we give them information, when they expect to have information back from us, or back to us, and then when the final will be completed. Our CPA, Summer, will be working on it.
Yes, they'll be working together sometime in October. We're trying to nail down a date.
Okay, and Mr. Jones has already begun those discussions and working on that too. So, if there are any questions about that, I know it's yeah, Dawn?
A couple things. There's one, first, just for clarification, it does say on our agenda bill for this that there's a recommended motion to approve the.
It's probably my mistake. My mistake.
I think we're required to do an audit.
Oh, I know, but.
Yeah, it was my mistake. Since it's already budgeted, there's really no motion for it. My experience.
We're moving into it.
Right, but it does kind of make sense to, well, maybe in the future to have other considerations, but my other concern is I'd like to know if it's possible we could request that Summer Sears not participate in the audit team this year. And I'm asking that on the basis that she closes our books each month, and I'd like fresh eyes on the project, particularly this season.
So doesn't our finance director participate?
Yes.
Everyone participates.
Everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, but I
I'll
have
be,
SGA is the company.
I'll be leading the process, the audit process. Summer will be basically reporting to me, and I'll be directing, things that she's working on. But I would say, from my own perspective, given the rather chaotic state right now that the books are in, because they haven't been attended to for 2 or 3 months, that we could definitely use some assistance from Summer, or someone of her caliber to help prepare for the audit. And she does have I met her, take with her son, chatted with her about the process, and she does have a very thorough knowledge of the records that is very helpful from working here for several years, so, I don't know if it's your concern with independence or, something that maybe I can answer, or it's.
Well, it was more on, I was concerned that when it came up about doing an audit on the water department or a mini audit. Since she closes our books, isn't that kind of a conflict that she's auditing herself?
Well, I mean, an auditor, really, all the auditor is doing is looking to make sure you're following the general accounting principles. You're not gonna look, they're not gonna look for fraud unless it's just that the city or the organization is following the right principles. I would really not like to see Summer not on the audit, because this city has been late in their audits for the past 3 or 4 years, and where we're not our welcome Department of Revenue. So, and given the fact we had that gap of a finance director, it's gonna be a challenge to even make it on time this year. So without the extra help of Summer, it's gonna be a real challenge, and will likely be late.
Can the state help us?
I will be very frank, and we'll be hard pressed to get the audit done on time.
Because I have an email the other day, in fact, I was gonna send it to you, Brian, I didn't, from the state about the audit, about the finance of our budget, what was done last year, and there was some red flags that
Yes.
you guys, I don't know, they sent it to me.
Right.
I don't know if did they send it to you?
No, but I mean, almost all of our audits have flags on them, and it's probably similar to what they found in the past. Because all the revenue does is they look at the audits that are done and turned in.
But they were looking at the actual budget that we did, and why we shouldn't have passed it.
Right.
Explain to me, and I should.
I'd appreciate that.
Yes, I will send it to you.
I don't think, I'd like to hear that too.
You need to see
I was aware of that.
I feel you need to see it, you need to talk to her, the one that's doing this. Cause I just got it back yesterday, the day before, I just got the information back and I asked for it, a long time ago, but they just now got time to look at it. And I'll send it to you for sure.
Okay, let's make sure that happens then. Counselor Kenyon?
So I guess to clarify, what I was thinking along the lines of was that the organization that we are engaging with, SGA, CPAs, and Consultants, LLP, I'm assuming they have more than one person that does auditing, and I was just requesting, could it be someone else?
They do, but the end of year is very, very busy. I don't even know if I'm gonna, right now, we kind of locked in on early October, and because of kind of the way that, looking at it right now, we may not be ready then, we're trying to push it 2 weeks. It's very difficult to find a CPA this time of year. It's very, if you really are intent on not having someone involved, then, maybe we could go to LCOG and buy one of their CPAs, but I don't know. That's an expense.
Is there something, Councilor Kennedy, or something we can do to alleviate concerns you would have with any concerns you have with Summer working on the audit or helping with audit preparation?
I think it's just simply what she's saying is, Summer closes the books, and so essentially it appears that she's auditing her own work.
She's
Part
not-
of her own work.
She's not here.
She's
All
not-
she's doing is supplying documents
Yeah.
to the auditor.
And she's not part of SGA, she's separate from SGA. So it's not like.
She's her own business.
Summer
She's
Sears
her
is her
own
own,
business.
is a
Summer
private
is her own
practitioner.
business.
Okay, I think that's.
she's-
So we have 2 contracts?
So we have Summer, and we
Yes.
employ Summer, and then we have an auditing company, SGA, who does the audit.
Summer does far more.
Summer's entirely independent of SG.
So she is, in a sense,
She balances the
providing the
checkbooks.
information for the auditor to look at. So they say, this is what we're gonna wanna see. Bill and Summer then provide all that information to the auditors. She's not auditing it, she's not part of
Oh,
SGA.
okay, then
Does that make sense?
Yes, that's what it sounds like.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought she was part of SGA, and
No, no.
couldn't they just supply someone else?
I see.
No, that would, you're right, quite right, that would be a conflict. If
That
we
is-
were that she
that
knows,
was
that firm would be in conflict.
Exactly.
Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Does that make sense then?
Yes, I'm good.
Wonderful, good. Glad we came
So
to.
since we took that out of the consent agenda, do we need to make a motion to approve that?
Well, I don't think the audit does need to be approved, because we haven't.
It was an error to put in a motion to approve it because it's something we have to do. and it's already budgeted. And so we just go through and we do that. So we moved SGA out of there. So let's move to, 10.1, police services report.
Okay, again, this was in response to Councilor Kenyon's request for an update on theft in Oakridge and any trends that we might see, and I asked Police Chief to talk to that.
So, if the council has all of their packets, and what it is the first page is thefts, and the second page is burglaries, which they're kind of tied together, because for it to be a burglary, there has to be a theft involved as well. If someone just breaks into a house, that's not a burglary, they have to commit a crime, it's called the crime they're in, and usually that crime is theft. It sometimes could be vandalism. And then also on the back page, that's our beats. We separate the city into 4 parts. The middle part there is basically a crest view, because it's kind of a small map. The middle part's crest view, and then splits into 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we kind of do that for crime data to see if a certain section of town has got something more than others. So if you go back to the first page, Sergeant McPherson and I worked on this. I have to give Sergeant McPherson the credit for this. She did most of the data. 6 hours. So the first table at the top. So the first 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's our beats on the map. So that's the areas. And then the LCSO. That's the ones that we have taken for Lane County or dealt with for Lane County. And then the Westford ones. That's the Westford. We didn't do Lowell on the graph because Lowell, our contract for Lowell is we mostly do traffic and code enforcement. So we've handled some burglaries for them in the past because the county wouldn't do it, and they request us extra to do that. So, but mostly Lowell is different from this. And then going down the column, theft 1, 2, and 3. That's the degrees of theft. Theft 1 being the highest, theft 3 being the lowest. And so the stats are from January 1st of this year to the 31st of August. So, and then when you look at the stats, we only are including the city of Oakridge ones there, not Lane County and Westford. That's just for reference. So Oakridge calls, we had 54 that resulted in 14 arrests. And then 30 of them, we had no suspect information. So those are what we would call open and active or cold cases. And then there's a graph at the bottom. So 1, 2, 3, 4 again, that's the beats. So that kind of shows the levels and the amount from Lane County and the amount from Westford. And then in the red at the bottom, just for a note just for Oakridge. So this doesn't include Westford, Forest Service, Lane County, Lowell, because our log encompasses all those. That's an incident log. So when someone calls Oakridge Police Department, they get an incident log number that starts with the year and then 001 and then so forth. So theft calls were, of all total City of Oakridge calls only, were 1.5% of our calls for service. So if that puts in perspective, yes, we do have theft crime, but on our total overall crime or calls for service, that can be anything from we had a dog hit today that we take an incident log in that. So that's 1.5% of our calls. And then switching to the burglary page, again, the same kind of graph. It shows the beats and then LCSO, which is unincorporated county, and then Westford. And then again, we've had 20 burglary calls that have resulted in 2 arrests, and then 18 no suspect information calls. And again, the graph on the bottom kind of shows by beat where they're happening. So if you look at so like burglary, we seem to have the highest amount in the number 1, which would be the northwest corner of the city. And then for thefts, it would be beat 3, which is the north or the southwest corner of the city. Just to take this in perspective, we had 20 burglary calls this year so far. My previous agency, one day I called in service and I had 38 cold burglary calls. So just in one day.
How does that compare to last year, do you think?
And we talked about the last couple of years, it take us a little longer in data.
I know. What is your feel for that?
What do you think, Mike? I think burglary is probably on par with theft, I'm not sure.
Okay. I was just asking for your opinion. I know it would take the data and all that.
Yeah, and we can break it down a little bit more too, it's getting information from dispatch and the district attorney's office and the city prosecutor's office. So, and then if there's questions.
Counselors? Thank you. Counselor Holland?
Definitely, thank you for this. I have actually a couple questions that aren't really on this, but I think they're important for citizens to know. And I always hear, oh, there's all these things going on and I can't get a police officer. And I constantly explain to people, we have one officer on at a time, you can only expect so much. So can you kind of explain how many officers we have and what our coverage is like, just so that the public understands? I mean, when I look at this, I'm like, wow, that is a lot of calls for one officer to be handling.
Well, to put it in perspective, was it probably 2 councils ago, I did a pretty in-depth study, and I'll try to find that for you. And, we handle so a lot of times I hear, you guys don't do anything. Well, our officers handle 2 to 3 times more calls than a Portland officer does. So, because Portland has more staffing. But you can, when you look at cities, you can compare, or states, or anybody, you can compare populations like per 100,000 people. So you can extrapolate our numbers to 100,000. So you could compare most cities together, or counties. So, right now, we work 12-hour shifts. The patrol officers work 12-hour shifts, 3 days on, 3 days off. So we have 24-hour coverage right now. But we can only afford to do that in the spring and summer months because if they work 12-hour shifts, that's in their contract, they automatically get overtime because they're working 4 days a week, 12. So a couple of years ago, the council wanted us to go to 24-hour coverage. I said, this is how much it will cost in overtime just for that. And it was more than our overtime budget. That was never budgeted for. We were told do as much as you can. So we tried that, and we didn't even get to Christmas time. We didn't even get 6 months in, and we were over budget on overtime, doing the 24 hours. So I was told by I think it was a pro tem at that point, we need to pull it back. It's costing too much, so we did that. So like here, when the rain starts, we just have to, by necessity, go back to 10-hour shifts. I don't know, and we haven't had a finance director, so I can't look at the numbers right now. So I put pressure on Bill to get us the numbers, so I can see he's working really hard on all that stuff. So we'll basically go back to either night shifts on 12s and day shifts on 10s, or all shifts are on 10s. So then we'll be down to 20 hours a shift. Coverage with the 4 hours will be a call out. So that's kind of our schedules.
Can you explain how many actually paid officers we have in the reserve?
We have 4 paid officers. And we have 3 reserves right now, and 2 of them work. They also have full-time jobs, so they're working at nights and on weekends. And unfortunately, Officer Ritz is moving to Lowell, so he's gonna spend more of his time reserving in Lowell, because he bought a house in Lowell.
Oh.
So we're gonna lose him some of that too, so we're gonna be down to 1 active reserve that lives in Oakridge. So we have a couple people who are in the process, but we haven't had really much of any interest of people locally. I think we've had 1 person interested locally.
So what are the qualifications to be a reserve officer?
They're pretty much the same as full-time officer. We have 2 reserves that are lateral reserves. They've been reserved before, or one's been reserved, and he was actually a trooper in New Mexico. He wants to get back into it, but he doesn't really want to work at Oakridge. He wants to work in Lowell again. He lives in Lowell, so he's going to have to spend time up here during his training process, but that's if he passes it.
So reserve officers have to have law enforcement experience?
No, they don't have to. So they have to, but the testing process is the same. The state sets standards on what you get for. And it's really not, some are standards, but the bulk of the standards are from the state. They have to take a written test, physical test. We don't make them take a medical test like the full-time officers do, because that's an academy requirement, and city requirement. And then they have to take a background check and a psychological test. And we've always given our reserve psych test, but now it's gonna be mandatory for all cities to give all their officers psych tests like they started doing. And that's another thing that's an expense to us.
No, that's fine.
So so at any given time, there's 4 officers basically doing the 12s. And then do you fill in on those rotations? Are you more 8 to 5?
I work mostly Monday through Thursday, and then I'm a cover officer too. So.
Yeah, cause I see you respond to a lot of stuff too, so I'm wondering how.
Well, me put it this way, when I sign paychecks and they get paid more than me and I've worked more hours than them, yeah, there's always that fun. So,
Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like everybody to know too, that it's, we have one officer on a time. If they arrest somebody, they go to jail, they're gone for 3 hours. If we have a child abuse case, they have to go to the kids' first interview, which is a child forensic interview. And myself and the reserves try to cover for that most of the time. Or I go to the kids' first interviews, or sometimes Michael goes to the kids' first interview. But, sometimes you might not get an officer because the officer's going to jail, so. We don't have 2 officers at one time, and we can't afford to call someone out just to sit while the other guys go run. Well, there might be a call, we have to be called reactive effectiveness. When stuff happens in the daytime, there's more law enforcement around, because we have troopers here during the daytime to help us. But at nighttime, it's us. Some nights, there's not even a deputy on the whole county, so there's no, and OSP, I think they keep 1 trooper on in Springfield, but the troopers are all, they're not out at night here in Oakridge, so. We can get backup, but it's a long ways away. So remember that in their efficiencies too. They have a lot of calls, and some calls take more priority than others, and sometimes we are going to get the calls. Michael and I try to make sure that every person that calls to us gets contact as soon as we can get contact.
Councilor Kennedy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I appreciate all of the information that you just brought to us. But I'd still like an opportunity to read my statement, because it's
Of course.
actually geared towards a little bit something different than everything you explained, although I like hearing that kind of stuff.
Go ahead. How did you do that now?
If we're ready. Okay, so I already read the first paragraph about what brought me here. I'd like to see the perception change. I feel strongly that our chief of police is inherently good. I'm confident that with changes in our administration recently, our community is going to see positive changes trickle down in all the departments, especially in police and fire, where we've had so much going on. I'm hopeful that we will have more community education through the newly developing safety committee that's forming soon as well. But the main reason I wanted to open the discussion with council tonight is because I would like to ask for the council's support in putting on a town hall meeting specifically to talk with our community about the justice system. I've actually asked our district attorney, Patty Perlow, if she would come and talk to our citizens about how the system works and do open discussion on how or when we might see some changes. To preface, this is in regards to the general community feeling that even though you're getting calls and responding to them, that the people aren't getting in trouble. They're right back out and they're committing the crimes again.
Well, can I preface that real quick?
Yeah.
'Cause some of that's a misunderstanding. People aren't staying in jail, and that's not just the district attorney. That's several fold. So I've had several people in the past few months actually yell at me because of people getting out of jail. And I wanna make sure everyone knows that Oakridge police officers don't let people out of jail. So, when they go in, pretrial services is a separate thing within the jail, and they can let people out of jail. The corrections department can let people out of jail in what's called matrixing. So if you have 20 jail beds and I arrest somebody for theft and they have 20 murderers in there, they're gonna let the person out that's done the theft. And then, whether I agree with the district attorney or not, they don't handle many misdemeanor cases. But, again, in their defense with that, I think we're the only city in Lane County that doesn't have our own full misdemeanor court. So, part of it, is it her responsibility to do our misdemeanor cases? I don't know, yes and no. So, and not to be political, but we live in Oregon. We live on the West Coast. In my opinion, this is my opinion, as a 24-year law enforcement officer, but our criminal justice system is starting to become a place where my patrol officers feel like it's like the bad guys are the good guys now and the cops are the bad guys, if that makes sense. Because we do a job whether it's at the federal level, the state level, people don't want people to go to jail. Some rightfully so. I'm not necessarily a civil justice warrior, but some people are. And the representative here, I'm sure he's been in many conversations, especially this last legislative session, about law and order, and, you know, some of our legislators want to turn back even Measure 11, which mandates some mandatory minimum sentencing. But I guess I'm going off track a little bit. So sometimes we arrest people and they get out of jail right away, but they do have court dates. And sometimes they'll have a court date 6 months later, and that's when they end up going to prison or getting put on probation. So, when I was a baby cop in 1995, things were different. We arrested people, they went to jail, they went to prison. I mean, albeit that was in a different state, north of us, but crime was more looked after now, and it's a little different, so. It's frustrating for us patrol officers, and so the council can think about this. I know our money's tight, but the single biggest thing, and I've talked to the mayor about this, and the city administrator, and some of the other councilors at points, it's not even the police office. If we had a full misdemeanor court, where we already have a prosecutor, a judge, and court clerk, but they're mostly handling our violation stuff, and then the prosecutor and I, and if we're gonna talk about the justice system, I think we should invite Pat Melody, our city prosecutor, too. Because he sometimes handles more stuff than the DA's office does for us, just out of the nature of the way it goes. And he's also worked for the same attorney's office that is now the city attorney. He's been our prosecutor for many, many years. And he would be a good person to talk to. Because for advice, we go to him more than we go to the district attorney's office, because we have a very open relationship, and he's very helpful to us. He brings us training, he helps us a lot. And a lot of law enforcement, there's animosity between the law enforcement and the district attorney's office a lot. It's not just us, I have several other chiefs that I talk to all the time that want more people put in prison, more people put in jail, but it's a total thing, it's not any one person's fault. But, because when I wanna say, when stuff is on us, when we make a mistake, that's where I wanna fix things. But when the officer does a hard job and is frustrated because he takes someone to jail and he gets back, and then, you know, or else, I give you a perfect example, I won't name the name, but we have a person that's on probation that steals a lot of petty stuff in town, pop cans, bikes, that kind of stuff. We, or Oregon State Police, is arresting him constantly. He'll go back to his probation violation, he'll go in for 28 days and get out, and then he starts all over again, and within a couple weeks, he's also a sex offender, so usually what we get him on is the easy thing, he doesn't re-register where he's supposed to register, so he's out of compliance, and that's that.
It's a forfeit.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could have an analysis of how much it would cost to get a court, talk about.
Misdemeanor court.
Yeah.
Well, so I have done some of that, and I will talk to Pat and I and the judge can work on some of that. And it's, the basic expense I was explaining to the mayor the other day is, so when we have arrests, it's the reason Springfield built their own jail. Springfield built their own jail a few years ago. If you go back and research it, because Lane County didn't have the beds to hold people for, even if they paid for it for their own thing. So they built the city of Springfield built their own jail to keep people in jail. And for me to put a male prisoner in Springfield, it costs $90 a day. So think about that. We had a guy that we did a misdemeanor case on, just one case. His defense attorney fees were $6,000 some over budget for the court. And I can only, we wanted to put him in jail for the year, but we could only afford not even a month.
So just to clarify, when he says $90 a day, that's $90 a day we pay,
Yes.
not the county.
We pay.
We pay.
What did our court, what did our jail used to cost us a day? Our jail. When we,
Way less than that, just meals and maintenance, basically. But we lost our jail when we lost dispatch, because you have to have it housed 24 hours a day. And that's maybe just a little piece to peek into fire again. When we had dispatch, we lost dispatch, we will never get it back, unless for some reason we strike golden oil here. And so, just to note back to fire, that if I'm afraid that if we ever lose fire, we'll never get that back either, so.
I agree with you. Counselor Whitney?
I just, only because I don't know, are most drug crimes misdemeanors or?
They didn't used to be, but last year, 2 years ago, the the governor, I don't know if it was the governor and the legislature, but that was passed where most drug crimes for persons were made to misdemeanors, they used to be felonies. But that's a national trend.
So that plays into Lane County not wanting to prosecute because they're misdemeanors.
And it's not that they don't want to, some of it's just a money game. So, sometimes the district attorney and I don't want to get along, I will be the first one to say that. But, her hands are tied in a lot of stuff too, so, and she doesn't have near the staff she should for our population either, so.
So I'm gonna kind of stop this conversation and circle around to what Dawn asked for originally, was, for the council to consider, putting together some sort of a town hall that just speaks directly to, and only to, what law enforcement challenges we have, how our judicial system works, why we see repeat offenders coming out. I mean, I know many of us know the answers to what we've heard Chief say already, and it may be that a town hall isn't the best way to do that. Perhaps it's a different way of communication, but I do think it's something that council should consider, and how do we communicate this to our citizens, so that they have two things. So that they have more facts about what is happening and a knowledge base, but then they also have an understanding of what our police officers are having to deal with. It's not their fault that the person that just got arrested because they slashed their tires is back on the street. That's, the arrest happened, the court released them. So maybe we should have a discussion about how we can do that. So I would ask council to put some thought themselves into how best to communicate this to our community. And I'm not ruling out a town hall, I'm just saying let's really think about this thoroughly. And then perhaps Councilor Kenyon, would you like to be the lead on that, putting that together?
I would, but I also wanted to specify, I didn't get a chance
Sure.
reading this, but just
Oh, I'm sorry.
without going there, I just wanna say, my big reason for wanting a town hall is for education, that information that we can provide, and our district attorney and our police department and the prosecutor can provide, but also to hear from our citizens, how they're feeling about, there's a lot of talk going on right now about people taking matters into their own hands, and that is what I am afraid of. I'm afraid that it's gonna get to the point where someone who's normally a good person is gonna make a big mistake, and then they are gonna suffer, because that is the person that's probably gonna end up spending the rest of their life in jail.
Well, I think that, while I agree with you, and that I have heard that when I happen to pop into Facebook, I will say, and I'll just be honest,